Hi, my name is Tony, and today we're going to talk about the Fusion page inside of DaVinci Resolve. Now, the purpose of this video is to give you an understanding of the basic layout and functionality, as well as look at some of the core concepts of compositing. So when we're done, you should be able to understand the basics of node-based compositing using keyframing, tracking, chroma keying, and start to be able to build and design your own visual effects and graphics. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the interface of the Fusion page. All right, so at the very top, we have the interface toolbar. Now, you can click and open different panels when you need them. It's a great way to customize the layout of your interface. You can also just click and drag and expand these panels based on your needs as you're starting to build more and more complex node structures. So if you need to, you can always just reset by clicking the Reset UI Layout in the Workspace menu. And that'll bring you right back to where we just started. So right below the interface toolbar, we're going to have our viewers. We have a viewer on the left and a viewer on the right. Now, if you're coming from something traditional, say editing, you might be used to seeing these viewers predominantly with the viewer on the left being for your source media and the viewer on the right with your timeline media. Well, in Fusion, it's a little bit different. Each viewer is independent. So what that allows you to do is to view any part of your pipeline in any viewer as needed. So for example, you could be viewing the output of your final composite in viewer 2, while in viewer 1, you're looking at, say, a text node or some other graphic node where you could be dialing in the color or the font and seeing it ripple all the way through in viewer 2. Above these viewers, you have these common tools. Now, these tools might change based upon which node you have selected. Right below that, we have the time ruler. Now, this allows you to navigate across your clip and seeing each frame as they're laid out. A common practice with compositing is to be able to preview just a certain area of your clip as you're working and as you're designing. So you can do that by adjusting these little render bars here. And I'm going to bring these in. And so now you can concentrate and preview just on a specific part of the clip. We're not changing the editing, we're not trimming it, we're just changing what we're previewing. So keep that in mind. If you need to be able to zoom in, you can use the zoom bar and zoom in on the frames that you need. Now let's reset that. We can reset the auto render range by just right-clicking and say auto render range. Now we reset our clip. Okay, below that, we have the toolbar. And the toolbar is going to have your most common used tools when you're compositing or designing graphics. If you need to have access to all the tools inside of Fusion, you can click on the Effects library, and under Tools, you have access to all the different types of effects and nodes. Next, we have the node editor. Now, this is where we're going to be doing a majority of our node construction and node building. And as you're building and designing bigger node structures, you're going to need to be able to move around and navigate inside of that. So how do we do that? Well, if you click on the middle mouse button, you can move your nodes. If you don't have a middle mouse, you can hit Shift plus Command. And you click on the left mouse button, that'll do the same thing. If you want to be able to zoom in and out, the Command key plus the scroll wheel will zoom in and out. Again, on the keyboard, plus or minus will let you zoom in and out of the node editor. All right, finally, on the right side, we have the inspector. Now, the inspector is going to have all the different parameters and properties based upon which node you have selected. This is where you'll actually do your tweaking to your nodes. So you have one node selected, it'll show and populate with different sets of parameters for you. Okay, so now that we've taken a look at the interface, let's actually talk about the nodes. So what do we have? We have a media in node and a media out node. What are these? Well, right now we're looking at a fresh composite straight from the edit page. So let's take a look at the edit page. You can put your playhead over the clip that you want to work on, click on the Fusion page, and that clip is represented by this media in node. it's being piped or sent to the media out node, and this is what gets sent back to the other Fusion pages, the edit page, the color page, and ultimately the render page, the delivery page. So if we want to make any type of effect, we will place our nodes in between these two nodes, and that will affect our image pipeline. Now, if you notice, we're viewing in Viewer 2 our media output node. So how is that, or why is that? Under every node, there is these 2 or 3 dots. On the media out node, we have a white dot in the middle. That's telling us that we're transmitting that node to Viewer 2. If I wanted to, we can select media in node and click 1 on our keyboard. That's going to transmit the signal from that node into Viewer 1. So again, you can see any node you want in your pipeline and any viewer you want. All the viewers are independent. So you can see the beginning, the middle, or the end of your pipeline. Now, in this case, we have 3 dots. That's because we have a grading monitor. So you can send the signal out from any node to your grading monitor as well. OK, so let's start by first organizing and renaming our nodes to keep track of them. So we're going to click on Media 1, right-click on it, and say Rename. I'm going to type it South Pole. And just a quick note, when you're naming tools in Fusion, you can't use any spaces, so make sure you use an underscore or capitalize to separate. Now we're going to click our media out node. Instead of right-clicking, we're going to hit F2. Let's do that again. We're going to hit F2, and that will bring up our rename tool dialog. I'm going to name this output. OK, great. Now let's go ahead and start adding our first node. We're going to go to our effects library, scroll down to our warp folder, and let's click and drag our grid warp right into our node editor. OK, so we've added our first node. But what's happening? Well, right now, nothing is happening. We need to attach our grid warp node into our pipeline. So let's do that. I'm going to click and drag, holding the Shift key, and you'll notice when I place the grid warp over that pipeline, it changes to blue or yellow. When that happens, release. Now it's connected. Now we can actually start affecting our image pipeline. So let's go to our viewer and just start warping and changing our image. Now, I know this is not practical, but just a good way to give you a visualization of what we can do and how each node affects the pipeline. And real quick, I want to jump back to the edit page just so you can see that what we've done in the Fusion page has affected our edit page. There's a live connection between the output node in Fusion and the other pages in Resolve. You don't have to do any type of exporting or rendering. Make a change, and it's now available in the other pages. So we're in the edit page. At any point in time, if you want to be able to, let's say, bypass the effects, you can hit Shift+D, and that will bypass all of the effects showing your source media. It's a great way just to toggle back and forth. While we're here, if you look down here on the bottom right hand of our clip, you'll see these 3 stars, and that's just letting us know that we have a Fusion composition on this clip. I'll turn my effects back on and go back to Fusion. OK, let's reset this and do something that's a little more practical. So to reset it, with our node selected in the node editor, right by the grid warp on the far right side of the name, click the Reset button. This just resets our tool right back to the default settings. All right, let's hover our mouse right over our viewer. Holding the Command key and using the scroll wheel, I'm just going to zoom out. Now I'm going to hold the Shift key and just select the bottom 2/3 of these grid warp vertices. So what do I need to do? Well, I want to reframe this shot just to give it a little more visual impact. And we're going to do that with the grid warp. So I'm going to shift all these pixels down and reframe my shot by hitting the down arrow. Now, if you notice, it's going to take me a little while to do that. So let's hit the Shift key, hold the Shift key, and just press our down arrow a couple times. All right. So I'm going to click inside of the node editor just to deselect. And you can see now we've reframed our shot using the grid warp. Again, let's go back to the edit page. It's available there for us. And if we go to the color page, we can also see that we do have a color look applied. Let's turn that on. And now we've got a color. So you can see the process from the edit page to the fusion page, back to the edit page and color page. Very, very simple, very powerful way of working right inside of Resolve with Fusion. Okay, let's get on to our next lesson. Back to the Fusion page. I'm going to change my clip by going to the interface toolbar and clicking on the Clips Timeline button. So what this has done is it's allowed us to look at all the clips available to us in our timeline. And while we're here, we can right-click on any clip and we can create a new composition. So why would we want to create a new composition? Well, a lot of times you're going to be working and designing and building, and you might want to try something different. So by creating a new composition, you essentially can create a new version, and anytime you need to go back to the original, you have access to that. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and close down our clip timeline, keep our workspace nice and tidy. What do we have? Well, our actress is in space. She's just waking up, and she's looking at her heads-up display, or HUD, on her screen. So we need to composite our HUD over our actress, give a little shallow depth of field effect, and we're ready to move on to the next clip. So let's get started. First of all, let's rename our clips. Media 1 in. And our output. Again, pressing the F2 key. Okay, I'm going to grab my animation of the HUD in my media pool. And just so you know, the media pool is the same media pool available in all the other pages in DaVinci Resolve. So when you're in Fusion, you always have access to your footage. So let's just click and drag our media asset right into the node editor. And so just like that, we've added our first piece of media right inside the node editor in Fusion. Let's close it down. And let's rename this. Okay, great. So I want to talk about one of the most used tools, and that is the merge tool. So we can add the merge tool from our toolbar right up here. And the beauty is that Fusion has laid out these tools for us based on categories. So on the left side, we have generators, we have color corrector nodes, we have compositing and transform nodes, we have nodes for mask, particles, and 3D nodes. Now, if you're not sure which node or which icon to click on, just leave your mouse over the icon and a pop-up label will let you know which one it is. In this case, we want to use the merge tool. So we're going to click and drag our merge tool right onto our pipeline. And just like that, you can add a tool, a node, right into your image pipeline. So what is a merge node? Well, when you're compositing, you're going to want to bring two pieces or two layers together, and that's why you use the merge node. It allows you to stack your layers over each other and merge them together into your image pipeline. So for example, you want to add text over video. Well, you use a merge node to bring those two together. Now, depending on how many different layers or how many different elements you need, you'll need a merge node for each of those elements. Okay, let's look a little closer at the merge node. We have two inputs. On the left, we have a yellow arrow. That's for our background. Above, we've got a green arrow. That's for our foreground. And keep in mind, you're going to want to, every time you do a composite, just keep that in mind as you're putting your layers together. Which layer do you want to be your foreground, and which layer do you want to be your background? Okay, we have also, like most of the other tools, we have this blue mask input. Now, this allows you to connect a mask to a node, and that way you can isolate that section of the node based on a mask. And we'll get into that a little later. Lastly, we have this white square, and that is our output. So our node has done all of our compositing or tweaking or whatever it's done, and that's going to send the signal out from that node onto the next node. In this case, it's going to our output node. Okay, let's do our first composite. and take the output of our HUD and connect it to the foreground of our merge node. Right away, you can see we've done our first composite. So with our HUD node selected, let's hit the number 1 key and view it in Viewer 1. Now, you might have noticed that there's a checkerboard background behind our graphic. That's just letting us know that this element or this media clip has an alpha channel. We can view the alpha by clicking the letter A in our keyboard, and this is going to show us the black and white matte, white being full opacity, black being full transparency. Anything that's semi-transparent, it's going to be represented by gray. Okay, so let's hit A again so we can see our color image. Now, looking at these two, I can see that my HUD is a little larger than the frame for my actress. So I'm going to want to be able to resize it and reposition it. Now, we're going to do that with the transform node. But the question is, where are we going to place the transform node? Now, because I only want to affect our HUD, I'm going to place the transform node after our HUD. Let's do that. So let's go to the effects library, open up our tools, scroll down to transform, and again, just click and drag the transform node and connect it to our HUD node. Okay, great. Now, in the inspector of our transform node, we can click on the slider and adjust the size. If you want to get a little more granular, you can click on the text field and scale it down or up in smaller increments. Now, if you need to reset just that tool, there's a little white dot underneath. If you click that white dot, you'll reset that tool. Now, real quick, you might have noticed that as we are changing the size of our HUD, we only see the change happening on our Viewer 2. Why is that? Well, we are viewing our final output from our output node into Viewer 2, and we're viewing our HUD node into Viewer 1. Now, our HUD node is happening before the transform node, so that's why we're not seeing any changes. So keep that in mind as you're building and designing your node structures, which node is going into which viewer. Okay, let's get back to our transform node. Let's adjust the size. We're going to scale it down. That looks about right. And we could use these text box controls for our position, but in this case, it's going to be much easier just to use our on-screen controls. So our two red arrows, let's click in the center and just move our HUD into place. There we go. Now, with our HUD scaled and into place, let's finish it off by adding a depth of field effect by adding a blur. Again, the question is, where are we going to add the blur? So let's bring in the blur. Okay, so if I add the blur after the actress, I'm going to blur my actress, my HUD will stay in focus. That's not what we want. If I'm going to add the blur after the merge, well, that'll blur everything. Again, that's not what we want. So if I were to put the blur after the transform, it would just blur our HUD, leaving our actress in focus, and that is what we want. So think about that as you're building your node structure. Where you place the node is going to affect that portion of the pipeline. So as you're building your node structure, just keep that in mind. Okay, let's add a blur, changing the size a little bit. All right, that's good. Now to finish this off, I want to be able to add some blur around the edges of our actress's face. And of course, to do that, I'm going to add another blur. But I'm going to grab it from the toolbar and bring it right in. And we're going to crank up this blur. Okay, so this is not quite what we want. We need to be ellipse to isolate the blur to one specific area. And we're going to do that by using a mask, in this case, an ellipse mask. So let's grab our ellipse mask, bring it in, and connect it right to our blur. With our ellipse mask selected, let's hit the number 1 key, and we can view that in Viewer 1. So on screen in Viewer 1, we can change the shape of our mask and its position. Now, it's going to be much easier if I just do this in Viewer 2. That way I can see it in context with my actress. All right, great. We've got the shape where we want it. But the problem is the blur is happening inside the mask. We need the blur to happen on the outside of the mask. And we can change that by going to the inspector and clicking on the invert button. Now we have the blur on the outside, and it's nice and sharp and focused on the inside. So let's just finish this off and polish it by creasing our soft edge and blending our blur into our shot. Okay, well, there we go. We've got our first composite, nice, clean, and simple, right inside of Fusion. Let's move on to our next section and build a nice, cool title design for this aviation documentary. So let's go back to our clips and switch over to our next one. Okay, so we need to create a title, Living in the Age of Aviation. And we're going to do that by using Fusion's Text Plus nodes. So with my media node, my media in node selected, I'm going to click on the text node in the toolbar. And because I had my media in node selected, Fusion has automatically added my text node and a merge node and linked them together for me. So based on what you have selected and what you click on, Fusion is going to start to put those things together for you. All right, let's just move this text node up above. And if you noticed in the inspector, now we have a lot more controls. We also have other tabs that we can access different panels and change different things like shading elements or transform controls, all inside this inspector. Now in the text tab, I'm going to click in the text box and type in our first line. Living in the age of. All right. Right below this, we've got a plethora of different types of controls to change sizing, tracking, font, you name it. We're going to change this real quick to Arial, change the weight to regular. I just want to decrease the size some. Let's see here. Right about there. Now in the viewer, I can directly control the position of the text, again by dragging those arrows. And I want to do that right above the waterline. Again, as we're working, I can just dynamically change the interface to what I need at that moment in time. All right, we got our first line of text. Now I want to break our title into two lines, a top line and a bottom line, because I want to be able to add different stylized look to the bottom line. So let's add the next bottom line. I'm going to select the merge node, again click on the text button. Fusion has added, just like before, our text and our merge. Okay, let's select our text and let's add our line. Aviation. Great. Let's quickly change our font, maybe like an Arial black, and let's increase the size. Again, you can just, adapt, shift, change according to your design preferences. I'm going to take the tracking out some, just so it's outside of our first top line. Okay, let's just change the color. Maybe something like that. Now, before we go any further, a couple things. I want to rename our nodes. Let's keep track of our nodes, making sure that we always can come back and know what each node is doing. So our text node is selected. Let's hit F2 and name this Living in the Age. Let's select our text 2 node, again F2, and name it Aviation. Now you can see here that I have my nodes laid out. My text node for the top line is up here, and the bottom one is down here. Now you're free to organize your nodes however you feel fit to organize them. It's not going to change or impact the visual outcome of your composite. The only thing that's going to change that is where you take the output of that node and where you connect it to. So as you see fit, go ahead and design and organize your nodes as needed. Okay, let's look at our bottom line aviation. We can do a little bit more stylistically wise. So with our aviation node selected, let's go back to our inspector and let's click on our shading tab. Now this is going to allow us to add other different layers to our text. So for example, outlines or drop shadows or glows, you can do that all in one text node using the shading tab. So we've got our element, shading element of 1 selected. I'm going to change its type from a solid color to a gradient. Now, I don't want to use a black and white gradient, so I'm going to change that. Let's click on this triangle here to the far right, and let's go back to that bright yellow that we had. And now let's click on that triangle to the far left, and let's give it a nice dark orange. There we go. Okay, nice. So let's add another shading layer. We can do that by selecting our element and clicking on 2. Well, nothing has happened. We need to enable it. So let's click the Enable checkbox. And you can see its default is set to an outline. And that's great. I don't want it to be red. I want to change the color. So I'm going to click and hold on this eyedropper right next to the color palette. Click, hold, and drag right on my text. And select my color. Great. Not bad. Let's add another element. Let's go to 3. Let's enable that. That's our drop shadow. That's a little strong, so I'm just going to change the opacity and dial it back just a little bit. So somewhere around half. Looks pretty good. And you know what? Let's go ahead and add that same shadow to our living in the age of top line. So let's go select our node in the editor, go to the shading tab, and in our elements here, I can just jump straight to number 3 since we know that its default is a drop shadow. I'm going to double click here and just put it at half opacity. Not bad. We've got a nice structure for our title design. Now let's add a little bit of animation to bring our title to life. And we're going to do that animating keyframes. Okay, so instead of animating all these different shading elements, the opacity of that, let's just actually animate the merge node using the blend parameter. And as you can see, as I'm scrubbing the blend parameter, you can see on screen that it's affecting the opacity of our top line. So first we need to decide where we want our animation to finish. So let's say we want it to finish around the 1 second mark, which is at 24 frames. So put your playhead on the 24 frame mark. Let's go to our blend tool and let's set a keyframe. It's this white diamond next to our blend tool. When you click it, you've activated a keyframe marking that parameter's value at that point in time. So this is our end keyframe. Now we need to create our beginning keyframe. So let's say that we want to do this at half a second. So around the 12th frame mark, I'm going to click in my time ruler, go to my 12th frame, and I'm just going to drag my blend parameter down to 0. Now as I scrub this in my time ruler, you can see that we've animated our opacity for our top line, basically fading it on. You can also see in our time ruler that there's these white marks, and those are our keyframes. It's a great way to see, based on the node you have selected, where your keyframes are at in time as you're working on your node right inside the time ruler. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on our aviation button. And let's do a little bit different animation. So let's click on the text tab. And this time we want to animate the tracking. So our playhead is on the 24 frame mark. Let's click on our white diamond, making a keyframe. And instead of using my mouse to click and drag inside of my time ruler, I'm just going to double click inside the timecode box and type in 12. That's going to take me exactly to the frame that I typed in there. And let's just bring out our tracking. So now we've just animated our tracking. We started on frame 24, we set a keyframe, we went to frame 12, and we opened up our tracking. So now it's starting out wide and coming in tight. Real quick, we need to do the same thing we did to merge 1. We're going to do that to merge 2. We're going to go to frame 24. We're going to make a keyframe on our blend. We're going to jump to frame 12. and we're going to bring our blend down. So remember that render bar range we talked about earlier? Well, I don't want to play the whole clip. I just want to isolate the playback to just this area. So I'm going to hold my command key and I'm going to click inside the time ruler and just extend out. Just like that. I'm now just previewing my animation as needed as I'm working on it. And this doesn't look too bad. It looks pretty good. But I think we can change it up a little bit and make it a little bit more, make it feel a little bit more natural. So what I would like to do is take our tracking keyframes, extend them, slow it down, make our animation feel a little more natural. And we're going to do that using the keyframe editor. So let's click on our keyframe editor in the interface toolbar. Okay, with our keyframe editor open, it's basically has a different look and a version of all of our nodes laid out for us, stacked as layers. So let's go ahead and click on this drop-down menu for our aviation node. And you can see these little white marks. Those are representative of our keyframes we just made. So I'm going to grab the first keyframe for our character spacing for aviation and bring it to the left, making it happen slower and longer over time. Now I'm going to grab merge to keyframe, the beginning or starting keyframe for our blend tool, and bring that out as well. So we've slowed down our animation, making it feel a little bit more natural, and it's good. I like it. I'm noticing that the first line, living in the age of, is kind of coming up a little late. So let's go ahead and drag its first keyframe out to the beginning as well. So right away you can see adding keyframes, adjusting, tweaking is a powerful way of using node-based compositing to do that right inside of Fusion. Now it's worth mentioning about the spline editor. So I'm going to open up the spline editor. I don't really need the keyframe editor anymore, so I'm just going to click it and close it. Now, the spline editor is a great way to tweak your keyframes to exactly how you need them over time. So right now, we're not seeing anything. I'm going to click on the character spacing, and that's going to reveal the keyframes for that specific parameter on that node. Now, to see that better, it's kind of small. I'm going to hit Command F, and that's just going to expand our keyframes to fill in the panel so we can see it a little bit easier. All right, so by default, our keyframes are linear, and you can see that by this line. This line is going straight from one point in time to the next. And that's fine, but it can cause, sometimes it can cause the animation to feel a little static or mechanical. So we want to be able to smooth that out and make it to where it eases in or eases out, speeds up a little bit, and then eases in before it stops. And we're going to do that by selecting our keyframes, just drawing a box around our keyframes. We've selected them. Now we're going to hit our smooth button at the bottom left. And you can see now that our line went from a straight line to this gradiated line. And you have full control of how you want your animation to happen over time. You can grab this vertice, you can change it, you can make it exactly the motion and the speed of motion that you want. But for us, for right now, the standard look is just perfect. So let's watch this back. All right, not bad. Here's our first look at doing some text animation right inside of Fusion. Let's get on to our next lesson and talk about some tracking. All right, so real quick, what do we mean about tracking? Well, what we mean is having the software analyze the pixel movement in a media clip to determine where things are moving. So we can take that, translate it into tangible coordinates, and we can attach it to other nodes or other tools. So what do I mean by that? Well, we can use it to attach a giant into a skyline or replace a screen on a mobile device. You're going to need to be able to track that motion and attach our artificial element or CGI element into our environment, and that's where tracking comes into place. So in our clip here, we've got our scientists giving an exposition on a robot they're developing. And so our audience should be seeing a robot, a holographic robot on stage. Now we're going to composite a robot and track it in. So let's go to our media pool. And our 3D department has already created a robot for us. So let's just drag our robot directly over our pipeline. We see the blue and yellow has changed on our pipeline. We're going to release. And again, Fusion has created the merge and attached our nodes for us. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and rename these nodes while we're here. So let's name this backplate. And let's select our media to in node. And let's name that robot. And our media out node, let's name it output. I hope that you're seeing that it's important to rename and keep your nodes organized, because you never know when you come back, you're going to forget which node is named which, and this way you do it right the first time, you always know where your footage, where your elements are at. Okay, so what are we looking at? Well, all I see right now is a robot over black. Why is that? Well, we're viewing our output into viewer 2. Let's take a look at our robot. So click our robot node, hit the number 1 key, and we're going to come up here to our on-screen controls, and let's take a look at the alpha channel. Right now, it's all white. So that's kind of telling us that we really don't have an alpha channel. And we need to, all those black pixels are actual RGB pixels. So we need to isolate our robot, removing the black and just allowing us to composite our robot. And we're going to do that using the merge node. So let's select our merge node. And let's change the apply mode from normal to screen. And that has allowed us to remove the black pixels, leaving our robot in place. Okay. So let's go ahead and change the size and positioning of our robot by adding a transform node. And I just clicked it right in the toolbar. I'm going to change its size and position it right about there. Okay, so if this didn't have any camera movement, we would be close to pretty much being done. But it does have camera movement, so when we play it back, it's basically just going to be a floating robot. We need to be able to track our robot to the footage so it's locked in and it feels like it's in its environment. So let's add a tracker. I'm going to select my backplate, go to my effects library, go to Tools, and under Tracking, we can drag a tracker straight into our pipeline. So what do we have going on here? Well, our tracker node is selected. On screen, you can see that Fusion has added a tracker for us. There's this solid line box. And what is that solid line box? Well, that is essentially where we're going to place our pattern for Fusion to track. It's going to need a pattern to be able to follow and track. And usually you want that pattern to be something that is sharp, very contrasty, and visible throughout the length of your clip. Next is this dotted line outside of that solid line. And that is the search area. So as your clip is moving or the camera is moving, you're going to want to define a search area that Fusion can look at to find that pattern in place. All right, let's reset our viewer and let's move our tracker. I'm just going to click in this top left corner. You can see this little white box that pops up. We're just going to click and move our tracker right here at the bottom of the screen. Okay, great. So that's a nice contrasty, sharp image. It's pattern. It stays up the whole length of our clip. Now, because I have my playhead at the beginning of my clip, I'm going to just track forward. Here's all of our different options to track forwards or backwards. In this case, we're just going to track forward. So click the track forward button. And Fusion's going through, analyzing each frame for that pattern and tracking it accordingly. We can see that right down here, it's locking in our tracked pattern. And when it's done, a pop-up menu box will let us know that it's complete. We've got our little playback here with our green line letting us know that we've got a nice successful track. We can also see our path, our motion path that Fusion has tracked for us. Now we're ready to attach our tracking data to our robot. So how do we do that? Well, let's change the operation of our tracker from none to match move. So basically, it's opened up some more parameters for us, turning our tracker into a merge node for us to use. So let's just attach our robot. I'm just going to break away its pipeline and reconnect it to the tracker's foreground input. Now we've got this black background again. Well, that's just because basically we have a fresh merge node. So let's change the apply mode from normal back to screen. And there we go. I'm going to delete this merge node. It's redundant. And our robot is attached. Now, because it's been tracked, it's kind of shifted a little bit. And I'm just going to change that by selecting the transform node and just bringing it right back into place. So not bad. We've tracked our footage to our background plate, and it's looking pretty good. I did notice here that our foreground audience is actually underneath the robot. So this is completely breaking the illusion that our robot is there in the scene in that environment. So we need to be able to isolate our audience and put them back over our robot. We can do that a couple different ways. Earlier we looked at using an ellipse mask. So we can draw a mask, we can use mask shape and animate our mask over our audience and put them back over. That will take a little bit of time. Or we can use our image data from our backplate and turn it into a black and white matte and use that as a traveling matte. So let's take a look at that. I'm just going to move my nodes up a little bit. I'm going to drag a color corrector in, and I'm just going to take another output from our backplate into our color corrector. And that's kind of one of the cool things about working with nodes, is that it's visual. You can easily just start rerouting and reusing things much quicker and faster because you're using nodes. So we've taken the output of our backplate, we've put it into a color corrector. Now I'm going to hit the #1 key. I have my color corrector node selected. So now we're viewing the color corrector in viewer 1. Let's turn it into a black and white image. We're going to desaturate it. We're going to come up to our menu and change it from colors to levels. And I'm just going to start to crush our shadows, our mids, and really crank up our highlights. And here we go. All right. That's looking like it's going to work just great. So what we're going to do is take the output of our color corrector and connect it to the mask input of our tracker. Nothing has really happened. Well, why is that? Let's select our tracker and let's go to the tracker settings. Now the tracker settings for the mask input is looking for an alpha channel. Well, we're not using an alpha channel, we're using the luminance channel from our RGB signal. So let's just change our channel from alpha to luminance, and right away you can see now it's applying that as a mask. Let's take a look at it. All right, not bad. We've brought in some footage, we've removed the black background, we've tracked it to our stage, and we've used our footage again as a traveling matte for compositing our shot. Not bad. Okay, let's move on to the next clip. And we're going to do just a simple green screen compositing. Okay, we've got our actor. He's in space, he's looking out a window. We need to remove the green screen and add a shot of a planet in the background. Simple enough. All right, so I'm going to select the media in node. And before we've been opening up our effects library, we've been grabbing tools from the toolbar. But there's another way that you can add tools in Fusion, and that is using a keyboard command of Shift and Spacebar. And that's going to bring up the Select Tool dialog box. Now this does require that you have an understanding of the different names for all the nodes. So first familiarize yourself with all the nodes and their names. That way, all you have to do is type in the name that you're looking for, and Fusion will automatically isolate it for you. So in this case, we're going to use the delta key. So I'm going to type in delta. Right away, Fusion's isolated. I can just hit enter. I had my media 1 in node selected. Fusion has added the delta keyer straight to our pipeline. Now there's a lot of different inputs that we have here for the delta keyer. Things like adding a clean plate to remove objects or adding pre-made garbage masks. You can add a lot of other image inputs to help guide and make your keying that much easier. For us right now, we just need a backplate for our key, so let's do that and key our footage. Our delta keyer is selected. I'm going to go to the inspector. For the background color, again, I'm going to click and drag this eyedropper right over our green screen and release. You can see that it's keyed out. We've got a checkerboard background back there, and it looks pretty good. It's a preliminary key. Let's take a closer look at it. We've got our delta keyer selected in the node editor. I'm going to hit the number 1 key, and let's take a look at its alpha. All right, well, we definitely have some room for cleanup. So let's go over to our matte controls in our delta keyer, and just adjust the threshold, tightening up our matte, and making our key that much cleaner. Okay, not bad. We might come back to this later once we start doing our compositing, just to tweak it some. So let's open up our media pool, and let's go back to our graphics bin, and let's drag in our planet right into our pipeline. Again, Fusion has added our media clip, added a merge node, and connected them all together for us. But this time, we see that all we see on our screen is just a planet. Well, why is that? Well, it's because of the merge node. Again, remember that foreground versus background, remembering which layer you want to be the foreground and which layer you want to be the background. So in this case, we have our planet as our foreground, and we have our green screen as a background. We need to be able to swap those, and you can do that very easily. Right-click on the merge node and go to Swap Inputs. And just like that, Fusion has swapped our inputs for us. Okay, so I want to be able to clean up these hard edges on our matte. So I'm just going to blur our matte just a little bit and bring in the row dilate. Okay, good. That looks a little bit more natural for us. Now, I'm going to select my media in node, my planet. I'm going to add a transform node to that, just because I want to be able to see our planet a little bit better. Now, one thing I forgot to do was rename our nodes. So this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all my nodes at once. Holding the Command key down, I'm going to select all 3 nodes. Now I'm going to hit F2. Media 1 in node is our backplate. And when I hit Enter, Fusion's just going to bring up the next rename tool. So Media in 2 node is our planet. I'm going to hit Enter again. And we have our Media out node, our output. So that's just a nice, easy, efficient way of renaming nodes all in one go. So we've looked at several different aspects of compositing and building our node structures. Lastly, I just want to talk about node organizing. We talked earlier that you can organize your nodes however you see fit. It won't impact the final outcome of your video. But it is important to be able to organize your nodes. So let's just take a quick look at some simple ways of organizing your node editor. I'm going to bring up my node editor here. So we can right-click right inside the node editor, and we can say line up all tools to the grid. As you're building, as you're adding nodes, things are going to start to be moved and placed different spots. So by aligning it to a grid, that'll allow you to keep your lines nice and straight and organized. Another great way is if by right-clicking and going to Arrange Tools and arranging tools to connect it. So what does that do? Well, it still allows you to keep your nodes and place them wherever you want to place them, but if you'll see here, as I'm scrubbing my node, it snaps as it gets to the center. Again, just another simple way of keeping your pipelines nice and straight and clean. Let's say, for example, we have a massive node structure, and we want to be able to put certain nodes in a container and hide them. So that way we'll keep our node structure clean. Well, you can do that. We'll select all of our nodes, we'll right-click, and we'll say Group. And just like that, Fusion has taken all of those nodes and put them into a group node. Now, we're free to rename that. And if you need access to it, you can just double click on it and you have access to all those nodes right inside the group node. But it's essentially like a compound clip, but just keeping it nice and contained, you still have access to everything. Okay, I'm going to hit this X to close it back down. And if you need to, you can right click and you can ungroup it, bringing it right back to where we had it. All right, lastly, you may not want to be able to group your nodes. You may still want to have access to them, but contain them as well. So we can do that with an underlay tool. So I'm going to select my nodes. I'm going to use our select tool menu, and I'm going to type in underlay. And what we've done is we've added this container that we still have visual access to our nodes, but now we can just move this underlay around. And it's going to drag all these nodes inside of it with it. If you option click on the header for the underlay, you can actually change its color by right clicking, and in this case we'll change it green, and we'll rename it as well. So you'll see that there's so much flexibility in organizing your nodes, keeping things nice and tidy, adjusting the UI, adding nodes for many, many different things. So I want to thank you for watching this video. Keep looking, keep exploring, and we'll come back